November 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Central Pacific. Private First Class Robert Sherrod crouched behind a disabled Amtrak as Japanese machine gun fire tore through the air above him. Around him, Marines were pinned down on the beach, caught between the ocean and fortified positions that seemed impregnable. The assault was faltering. Men were dying faster than they could advance. Then the Marine next to him, a corporal whose name Sherrod never learned, rose to one knee and began firing. Not the bolt-action rifle Sherrod had expected, but something different. Semi-automatic. The corporal fired 8 shots in rapid succession, each one aimed, each one deliberate. He dropped the empty clip, the distinctive ping barely audible over the chaos, slammed in another and continued firing. No working the bolt. No breaking his sight picture. Just continuous aimed fire. Other Marines were doing the same, rising from cover, firing rapidly, forcing Japanese defenders to keep their heads down. The volume of American rifle fire was stunning. It sounded like machine guns, but it was individual riflemen, each one delivering firepower that should have required a squad of bolt-action armed soldiers. The advance resumed. The beachhead held. Tarawa would be won, though at terrible cost. Later, Sherrod would write about what he'd witnessed. "The Japanese are still using bolt-action rifles," he noted. "Our Marines have the M1. The difference in firepower is the difference between victory and defeat. One Marine with a Garand can suppress multiple enemy positions. The Japanese have to expose themselves to work their bolts. Our boys just keep firing." What Sherrod was witnessing was the culmination of 2 decades of American weapons development. The M1 Garand was the first semi-automatic rifle issued as standard equipment to an entire military force. While other nations experimented with semi-automatic designs, only America had the industrial capacity and tactical vision to arm every infantryman with one. The advantage was overwhelming. This is the story of the M1 Garand, the rifle that General George Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised. It's the story of how one man's genius, American industrial might, and tactical doctrine converged to create a weapon that gave American forces a decisive advantage in every theater of World War II. And it's the story of how firepower superiority, not just numbers or tactics, could determine the outcome of infantry combat. The path to the M1 Garand began in World War I's trenches, where American forces learned a brutal lesson. Bolt-action rifles, the standard infantry weapon for every army, were too slow. In the close quarters fighting that dominated trench warfare, rapid fire meant survival. The French had developed the Chauchat automatic rifle, terrible weapon though it was. The Germans had machine guns and tactics to exploit them. American doughboys had bolt-action Springfields that required them to break their shooting position after every shot. After the war, the U.S. Army recognized the need for a semi-automatic rifle. The specifications were clear. The rifle must fire the standard .3006 cartridge. It must be reliable in all conditions. It must be simple enough for conscript soldiers to maintain. It must be accurate to at least 500 yards. And critically, it must be affordable to produce in quantity. America's potential enemies were arming millions of soldiers. Any new rifle had to be manufacturable at scale. Dozens of designs were submitted, most failed immediately. Semi-automatic operation in a full-power rifle cartridge was difficult. The forces involved were enormous. Systems that worked in controlled tests failed in mud, sand, and cold. The Army tested design after design throughout the 1920s. All were rejected. Too complex, too unreliable, too expensive, too heavy. Then, in 1924, a Canadian immigrant named John Garand submitted his design. Garand was a self-taught engineer working at Springfield Armory, the Army's primary weapons development facility. He had been designing firearms since childhood, driven by an obsessive perfectionism that bordered on mania. His previous designs had shown promise but had been rejected for various flaws. His new rifle would be different. The Garand design used a gas-operated system that was elegantly simple. Gas tapped from the barrel drove a piston that cycled the action. The system was self-regulating, venting excess gas automatically. It required no adjustments. It functioned in temperatures from Arctic cold to desert heat, and critically, it used an en-bloc clip system that was fast to reload and protected the ammunition from dirt and damage. The Army tested Garand's rifle extensively throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s. It competed against designs from established manufacturers, including John Patton's rifle, which many senior officers preferred. The Patton rifle was refined, elegant, and used a unique .276 cartridge that offered reduced recoil and increased ammunition capacity. But it wasn't chambered in .3006, and that would prove decisive. General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff, made the final decision in 1932. The rifle would be chambered in .3006. America had millions of rounds of .3006 ammunition in storage. Changing cartridges would require enormous expense. More importantly, MacArthur believed the full-power cartridge provided range and stopping power that lighter rounds couldn't match. The decision was made. Garand would redesign his rifle for .3006. The redesign took 4 years. The .3006 cartridge generated far more force than the .276 Garand had originally designed for. Every component had to be strengthened. The gas system required complete revision. The en-bloc clip had to be redesigned to handle the longer cartridge. But Garand persisted, driven by perfectionism and the knowledge that his design would arm American soldiers in the next war. On January 9, 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the rifle as the U.S. Rifle, caliber .30, M1. Production began at Springfield Armory immediately. The first rifles were delivered to troops in 1937. Initial reception was mixed. Soldiers accustomed to bolt-action rifles found the M1 heavy and complex. The en-bloc clip system was unfamiliar. The distinctive ping, when the clip ejected, seemed like it would alert enemies that the rifle was empty. But those who used the M1 in combat quickly became converts. The firepower advantage was undeniable. A soldier with an M1 could fire aimed shots twice as fast as with a bolt-action rifle. He could maintain his shooting position, keeping his sight picture and his awareness of the battlefield. He could engage multiple targets in rapid succession. The tactical implications were revolutionary. Production accelerated as war approached. Springfield Armory couldn't meet demand alone. Winchester Repeating Arms received a contract to build M1s. The two factories refined manufacturing processes, reducing costs and production time. By Pearl Harbor, over 500,000 M1s had been produced. It wasn't enough. America would need millions. The M1's design made mass production possible. Unlike the bolt-action Springfield it replaced, which required extensive hand-fitting, the M1 was designed with interchangeable parts. Any component could be swapped between rifles without adjustment. This was revolutionary for military firearms. It meant rifles could be assembled quickly by semi-skilled workers. It meant damaged rifles could be repaired in the field. And it meant production could be scaled to levels previously impossible. Additional manufacturers were brought in. International Harvester, a farm equipment company, retooled to produce M1s. So did other firms. At peak production, over 50,000 M1s were manufactured monthly. Each rifle required over 100 individual parts, machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. The manufacturing organization required to produce them was itself a technological marvel. The soldiers receiving these rifles needed training. The M1 was more complex than a bolt-action rifle. Loading required inserting the 8-round en-bloc clip into the magazine from above, then releasing the bolt to chamber the first round. The clip had to be inserted correctly or it wouldn't seat. The rifle had to be maintained differently. The gas system needed periodic cleaning. The operating rod required lubrication. But soldiers learned quickly. Training programs taught proper M1 operation in weeks. soldiers discovered the rifle's quirks. M1 thumb, the painful injury from the bolt slamming forward on a thumb while loading, taught respect for the weapon's power. The ping of the ejecting clip, initially concerning, proved tactically insignificant. In combat's chaos, enemies rarely heard it, and even if they did, the reload took less than 2 seconds. The rifle's reliability impressed everyone. Early concerns about complexity proved unfounded. The M1 functioned in conditions that stopped other rifles. It worked in Pacific jungles where humidity rusted everything. It worked in European winters where bolt-action rifles froze. It worked in North African deserts where sand infiltrated every mechanism. The gas system, properly maintained, was nearly foolproof. The first major combat test came in the Pacific. Marines landing on Guadalcanal in August 1942 carried M1s. The Japanese, armed with bolt-action Arisaka rifles, discovered American firepower superiority immediately. In jungle firefights where visibility was measured in yards, the M1's rapid fire was devastating. Marines could engage multiple targets before Japanese soldiers could cycle their bolts for a second shot. The tactical doctrine evolved around the M1's capabilities. American infantry tactics emphasized fire superiority. Squads were trained to generate overwhelming volumes of fire, forcing enemies to take cover while other elements maneuvered. The M1 made this possible. 8-man squads armed with M1s could generate firepower that previously required platoon-sized units. The rifle's accuracy was exceptional. The .3006 cartridge maintained effectiveness beyond 500 yards. The M1 sights were simple but adequate. Trained soldiers could reliably hit man-sized targets at 400 yards. This range advantage was significant. American soldiers could engage enemies before they could effectively return fire with submachine guns or shorter-ranged rifles. In Europe, the M1 proved equally valuable. The hedgerow fighting in Normandy required rapid engagement of targets at close range. GIs with M1s could pour fire into German positions, suppressing defenders while other soldiers advanced. German soldiers armed with Mauser K98K bolt-action rifles were at a severe disadvantage. They had to expose themselves to work their bolts. Americans just kept firing. German after-action reports from Normandy consistently noted American firepower superiority. One report from July 1944 stated, "The American infantry rifle is semi-automatic. This gives them decisive advantage in firefights. Our soldiers report that American rifle fire sounds like machine guns. Individual American soldiers can suppress multiple positions. This makes defensive positions difficult to hold." The psychological impact was significant. German soldiers facing M1 armed Americans knew they were outgunned. The sound of multiple M1s firing created the impression of overwhelming force. Even when outnumbered, American units could generate enough firepower to give the impression of superiority. This psychological advantage often proved as important as the tactical one. The rifle had limitations. The 8-round capacity was lower than some newer designs. The en-bloc clip system meant partially empty rifles couldn't be easily topped off. Soldiers had to fire all remaining rounds to reload, wasting ammunition. The rifle was heavy at 9.5 pounds empty, nearly 11 pounds loaded, and the full power .3006 cartridge generated significant recoil, making rapid fire physically demanding. But these limitations were acceptable trade-offs. The 8-round capacity was still double what most bolt-action rifles offered. The weight provided stability for accurate fire, and soldiers reported the recoil was manageable, especially compared to the punishment absorbed when victory depended on it. The M1 wasn't perfect. It was just far better than anything else available in 1944. Variants and accessories expanded the M1's capabilities. The M1C and M1D sniper variants added telescopic sights, creating accurate precision rifles. The M7 grenade launcher allowed M1s to launch rifle grenades, giving infantrymen integral explosive capability. Bayonets could be fitted for close combat, but the standard rifle, with iron sights and no accessories, remained the most common configuration. Maintenance in combat conditions was challenging but manageable. The rifle needed regular cleaning, especially the gas system. Soldiers learned to field strip and clean their M1s in minutes. Armorers could perform more extensive maintenance. The interchangeable parts meant damaged components could be swapped quickly. Rifles destroyed beyond repair provided parts for others. The reliability stories became legendary. M1s recovered from mud, submerged in water, or subjected to impacts that should have destroyed them often continued functioning. One famous account tells of a Marine whose M1 was hit by Japanese fire. The bullet struck the operating rod, bending it visibly. The Marine straightened the rod against a tree and the rifle continued functioning. Such resilience built trust. Soldiers knew their rifles wouldn't fail them. The rifle's longevity was remarkable. M1s produced in 1943 were still in service in Korea in 1950. Some served into the early Vietnam War before being replaced by the M14. The basic design was so sound that it remained effective 2 decades after adoption. This longevity justified the development costs and proved the design's fundamental excellence. General George Patton's famous quote calling the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised wasn't hyperbole. Patton understood infantry combat intimately. He recognized that the M1 gave American infantry decisive advantages in the firefights that determined battles. The rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was a force multiplier that made every American soldier more effective. The industrial achievement of producing over 5.4 million M1s between 1937 and 1945 deserves recognition. Each rifle was a precision instrument requiring skilled manufacturing. The coordination between multiple factories, the quality control ensuring interchangeable parts, the logistics of delivering rifles to troops worldwide, all represented organizational excellence. America's industrial capacity wasn't just about building tanks and aircraft. It was about building millions of complex rifles to consistent standards. The human stories reveal the M1's impact most clearly. Interviews with World War II veterans consistently praise the rifle. They describe it with affection reserved for trusted companions. The rifle saved their lives. It gave them confidence. It worked when they needed it. These testimonies, repeated thousands of times, validate the M1's reputation more than any technical specification could. Sergeant John Basilone, Medal of Honor recipient for actions on Guadalcanal, described the M1's importance. That rifle was everything. In the jungle, you couldn't see more than a few yards. When Japanese came at you, you needed firepower immediately. The M1 gave you that. You could engage multiple targets fast. Bolt-action rifles would have gotten us killed. The M1 kept us alive. The rifle influenced post-war infantry weapons development worldwide. The Soviet SKS was semi-automatic. The German St. G44 assault rifle used a similar gas system. Every major military recognized that semi-automatic fire was the future. The M1 had proven the concept decisively. Future rifles would build on its foundation. The M14 rifle, adopted in 1957, was essentially an M1 modified for selective fire and using a detachable magazine. It retained the M1's operating system and much of its design philosophy. When the M14 proved too difficult to control in automatic fire, the M16 was adopted. But the M16's operating system still owed conceptual debt to the M1's pioneering gas-operated design. The M1's influence extended beyond military applications. The design's reliability and accuracy made it popular for civilian use post-war. Surplus M1s were sold through the civilian marksmanship program. They became favorite rifles for target shooting and hunting. The .3006 cartridge was already popular with hunters. The M1's semi-automatic operation made it practical for various applications. Today, the M1 Garand remains in limited military use in some nations and is widely used in competitive shooting. The civilian marksmanship program still sells refurbished M1s to qualified civilians. These rifles, some over 70 years old, continue functioning reliably. Original M1s in good condition are collectible, with some variants commanding high prices, but most are simply appreciated as excellent rifles that happen to help win a war. The technical specifications tell part of the story. Gas-operated, semi-automatic .3006 caliber, 8-round and block clip, effective range 500 yards, rate of fire 40-50 aimed rounds per minute. But specifications don't capture what the M1 meant to soldiers carrying it. It was reliable when lives depended on reliability. It was accurate when accuracy meant survival. And it was powerful when power was needed. The comparative analysis with other World War II rifles shows the M1's advantages clearly. The German K98K Mauser was accurate and reliable but bolt action. The Soviet Mosin-Nagant was robust but crude and bolt action. The British Lee Enfield had good capacity and fast bolt operation, but was still manually operated. The Japanese Arisaka was adequate but bolt action. Only the M1 offered semi-automatic fire in a full-power cartridge as standard issue. The Germans developed the G43 semi-automatic rifle, but it was produced in limited numbers and suffered reliability issues. The Soviets had the SVT-40, an excellent design, but it was complex and expensive, issued primarily to elite units. Only America equipped its entire infantry force with semi-automatic rifles. This wasn't just technological superiority, it was industrial and doctrinal superiority. The cost per rifle was approximately $85 in 1943 dollars, equivalent to about $1,500 today. This seems expensive until compared to the cost of training a soldier, equipping him, and transporting him to combat. The rifle was a small fraction of the investment in each infantryman, and unlike other equipment, the rifle directly determined combat effectiveness. The M1's advantage in firefights justified every dollar spent producing it. The ammunition consumption was higher than with bolt-action rifles. Soldiers with M1s fired more rounds per engagement, but this wasn't wasteful. The increased fire volume suppressed enemies more effectively, enabled fire and maneuver tactics, and often ended engagements faster. The ammunition expenditure was offset by tactical effectiveness. Dead enemies don't return fire, and suppressed enemies can't aim effectively. The logistics of supplying M1 ammunition were challenging but manageable. The .3006 cartridge was already standard for machine guns and the Springfield rifle. Production capacity existed. The supply chain was established. Switching to the M1 required producing more ammunition but not creating new infrastructure. This logistical compatibility made the M1 practical in ways more revolutionary designs might not have been. The training pipeline produced soldiers proficient with the M1 in reasonable timeframes. Basic training included extensive M1 instruction. Soldiers learned to field strip, clean, maintain, and shoot the rifle. Marksmanship training emphasized accuracy and rapid fire. By the time soldiers deployed, most could operate their M1s competently. Combat experience refined these skills, but the foundation was solid. The replacement rate was remarkably low. M1s were durable. Lost or destroyed rifles were replaced, but mechanical failures were rare. Unlike some weapons that required constant replacement due to wear or breakage, M1s lasted. Rifles issued in 1943 were often still in service when the war ended. This durability reduced the replacement burden on industry and logistics. The psychological bond between soldiers and their M1s was real. Soldiers named their rifles. They personalized them with engravings or modifications. They cared for them obsessively. This wasn't sentimentality. It was recognition that the rifle was essential survival equipment. A soldier's M1 was his most important possession. Losing it or having it malfunction could mean death. The post-war era saw M1s used in Korea, where they proved effective again. Chinese and North Korean forces armed with bolt-action rifles and submachine guns faced the same firepower disadvantage the Japanese and Germans had. American and UN forces maintained rifle fire superiority throughout the conflict. The M1 performed as reliably in Korean winters as it had everywhere else. The M1's gradual replacement by the M14 in the late 1950s wasn't because the M1 was inadequate. It was because military doctrine evolved. Full automatic fire was deemed necessary. Detachable magazines offered tactical advantages, but the replacement took years because the M1 remained perfectly effective for its designed role. It wasn't obsolete. It was being superseded by evolved requirements. John Garand himself never profited significantly from his invention. As a government employee, his designs belonged to the United States. He received no royalties on the millions of rifles produced. Various attempts to compensate him with cash awards or special pensions had limited success. He died in 1974, honored by those who understood his contribution but never wealthy. His legacy was the rifle that bore his name and the millions of soldiers who carried it. The M1 Garand's place in military history is secure. It was the first semi-automatic rifle to be issued as standard infantry equipment to an entire army. It gave American forces decisive firepower advantages in every theater of World War II. It influenced all subsequent military rifle development, and it proved that technological superiority, supported by industrial capacity, could be as important as numerical superiority or tactical skill. When evaluating the M1's contribution to Allied victory, it's impossible to isolate any single weapon's impact. Wars are won by combinations of strategy, tactics, industrial production, intelligence, leadership, and soldier courage. But the M1 contributed significantly to American combat effectiveness. In countless firefights, the M1's firepower advantage proved decisive. Those advantages accumulated across thousands of engagements into strategic impact. The rifle didn't win World War II alone. No weapon could, but it was an essential tool that enabled American infantry to fight effectively against experienced enemies. It gave American soldiers confidence that their equipment was superior. It allowed tactical doctrines that exploited firepower advantages, and it demonstrated that American industry could produce not just quantity, but quality at scale. Today, the M1 Garand represents a particular moment in military history, the transition from bolt-action to semi-automatic rifles, the era when infantry rifles were still made of wood and steel, before synthetics and aluminum, the time when American manufacturing produced millions of complex machines to exacting standards, and the period when one designer's vision, supported by government and industry, could create something that changed warfare. The rifle's iconic status in American military culture persists. Films, documentaries, and historical accounts feature the M1 prominently. Veterans' memoirs describe it with respect and affection. Collectors prize original examples. Shooters appreciate its accuracy and reliability. The M1 transcended its utilitarian purpose to become a symbol of American military power in World War II. In the final analysis, the M1 Garand succeeded because it solved a fundamental infantry problem: how to give individual soldiers firepower previously available only from multiple soldiers or crew-served weapons. The solution was elegant engineering, practical design, and manufacturing excellence. John Garand created a rifle that worked reliably in the worst conditions, gave soldiers decisive advantages in combat, and could be produced in quantities sufficient to arm millions. The soldiers who carried M1s into combat across the Pacific Islands, European battlefields, and North African deserts knew what the rifle meant. It was the tool that kept them alive, the weapon that gave them advantages over enemies, the machine that worked when everything else failed. They trusted it because it earned that trust thousands of times over. The M1 Garand wasn't just a rifle. It was the companion that brought them home. And for that, it deserves its reputation as one of the greatest military rifles ever produced.